would like to start by making sure that everyone understands that although Yad Vashem was created by legislation of the Knesset, Yad Vashem is not a governmental agency. It's an autonomous, independent institution. And whatever I will say, although I assume that probably all of the things I will say, or for sure most of them, are also the official position of the State of Israel and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I represent here Yad Vashem and myself, and definitely not the government of Israel. So things I say should not be considered as official statements by the government of the State of Israel. That being said, let's plunge into the issue that the issues I want to share with you. And I will start with good news. They are quite rare these days, good news, so let's start with them if we have the opportunity. And the good news, in my view, is that outright Holocaust denial has become a marginal phenomenon. It wasn't always that way. I remember days in the 80s and the 90s, even in intellectual circles, there was a school of Holocaust denial. Today, I believe that no serious leader in the world, probably except Iran and one or two other countries, no serious intellectual, no serious journalist will say today that the Holocaust didn't happen, that there were no gas chambers in Auschwitz, or that millions of Jews were not murdered in Europe during the Second World War. We can't find definitely Holocaust denial in the lunatic fringes of the social media, but in the lunatic fringes of the social media, you can't find anything. So I don't consider that really as something significant. There are many reasons why it happened. I probably research that Yad Vashem is part of it, is one of them, but I think that the devastating verdict by a British magistrate in the trial of the Holocaust denier David Irving against Deborah Lipstadt, Professor Deborah Lipstadt, probably was one of the reasons. I believe that 3 consecutive pontifical visits to Yad Vashem put an end to Catholic Holocaust denial. And I must say that also, without any doubt, the activity of many diplomats, Israeli, but definitely not exclusively Israeli diplomats, in creating an organization like IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the Stockholm Declaration, the last conference convened by the Prime Minister of Sweden in Malmö a few months ago. All those, I think, put an end to Holocaust denial as a serious phenomenon in the world. But that's all I can't say about the good news. And now let's go to the majority of the other news. We confront, if I can ask everyone to put their computers in mute mode, it will be helpful. The bad news is that we face an extremely serious combination of 2 other phenomena that are no less dangerous. And that is Holocaust distortion and Holocaust trivialization. I would like to start with Holocaust distortion. The problem with Holocaust distortion is that it is extremely well funded. And the reason that is extremely well funded and well propagated is that in most cases it comes either from governments or from extremely powerful social or political groups. There are a few variants to this virus, a few variants to Holocaust distortion. The most common is countries that say, of course the Holocaust happened. Of course 6 million Jews were massacred by Nazi Germany. But in my country, those people say, the entire population helped the Jews. There were no collaborators with the Nazis. We actually were victims. Well, that is wrong. In every single European country that was under Nazi occupation or influence, collaborators abounded. Unfortunately, there were more collaborators than righteous among the nations that actively helped Jews. And that is an historical fact that we should be extremely careful not to blur. The second type of Holocaust denial, Holocaust distortion that we see these days is talking about the genocide. The Shoah, the Holocaust was not the genocide of the Jewish people, a unique event against the Jewish people, but again, they were killed because they were citizens of a certain country. We have seen lately even legislation in a certain former Soviet republic stating that explicitly, that there was a genocide of their nationals. I will be the last person to deny that the nationals of that specific country, I will say its name, it's Belarus, suffered during the Holocaust, and many of them were killed. But there was not a genocide of the Belarusian population like it was to the Jews. A Jew, if he was born a Jew, doesn't matter what he did or didn't do, his fate was, he was doomed to die. A third manifestation, by the way, the first manifestation of Holocaust distortion that I mentioned, basically saying that my country was okay, was good, didn't collaborate with the Nazis, is definitely not exclusive to Eastern Europe. We see these days a certain presidential candidate in a very large Western European country, actually a Jew, that says the Nazi-influenced government of my country helped the Jews, did not persecute the Jews. And again, that's an historical fallacy that we will not accept. There were other cases, probably less acute, like Austria, saying they were the first victims of Nazi Germany. By the way, I must say they didn't say any more. The contrary, they understand that that was wrong. So that is a part of our past and not of our present. Why is Holocaust distortion so no less a problem than Holocaust denial? In some senses, Holocaust distortion is more grave than Holocaust denial. And the reason is that Holocaust denial really is absurd. To rebut the statements that the Holocaust didn't occur, it's very easy to do that. You don't need deep knowledge or understanding of the facts in order to do that. But Holocaust distortion used very cleverly and cherry-picked facts taken without context, without the entire historical context, and hiding a large array of other facts in order to create an imaginary past. And we, in Yad Vashem and the State of Israel, I believe that in that sense I speak for the State of Israel, although it's not my authority to do that. I believe that Yad Vashem will be the guardian of historical accuracy. And I will tell you why. It's not only for the sake of science, for historical science. is not only for the sake, not even only for the sake of the future. Is also a debt we owe to the victims. Every time I think about this, I think about, let's say, a young girl from, I don't know, Białystok in Poland or any other European city. She was taken with her family to the local synagogue, cramped into the synagogue with her entire congregation, and the synagogue set ablaze. I am sure, I am convinced that in her last moments, she expected us to know everything about her fate, accurately, exactly what happened, who did it to her. Therefore, historical research regarding the Holocaust is not something, theoretical. It's an obligation we owe to the victims, no less than the obligation that we owe to future generations. And the second phenomenon that unfortunately goes rampant these days is Holocaust trivialization. I cannot say that Israel is free from that, not at all. It became even more atrocious after COVID arrived. I am sure you all know what I'm talking about, those abhorrent comparisons between the Green Pass, as we call it in Israel, and the Yellow Star. A prominent television commentator comparing Dr. Fauci with Mengele, a member of Congress comparing vaccine mandates to Nuremberg laws. And just a few days ago, the son of one of America's most respected political figures, an assassinated political figure, RFK, making that abhorrent comparison with Anne Frank. Some of them apologized, some of them understood their mistake, but this is a thing that we cannot accept. So, as we come to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, I would like to say the following. When we talk about the Holocaust, I think about 4 pillars. The first pillar is mourning. 6 million victims that were assassinated deserve mourning. So that's the reason you will not see in Yad Vashem flags waving. You will Yad Vashem, and I believe also other places they are in order to bow heads and shed tears and pray silently. The second thing is to know. That's the reason I already explained why, in my view, knowing is essential. That's the reason we call on all countries in which there are archives that contain documentation about the Holocaust to freely open those archives for free academic research. That is essential. There are countries and institutions, not all the archives are governmental archives. There are archives, there are governments, institutions, universities, and other places, religious institutions that pose extremely high hurdles to access their archives. And I want to explain why opening archives is so important. We say very frequently that we are in the last years in which we still have actual witnesses of the Holocaust with us. Their numbers are dwindling rapidly, and I don't know, I hope it will take many years, but at some point we will not have any more actual witnesses with us. But we sometimes tend to forget, with all the importance that personal testimony has, we sometimes tend to forget that 6 million Jews were never able to give testimony, never. And the documents that are in those archives are sometimes their testimony. Their testimony in efforts they did to save themselves and turn down sometimes, letters, cards, identification cards, many things that, yes, we are obsessed in finding each one of them. By the way, they also are perishable. Therefore, also in our archives, we are probably in the last years in which we can find the documentation. And the second layer that is essential is research. Research that is based in that same documentation. And here again, I want to call on all governments to allow free, unrestricted research of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, we see these days in many countries, or at least in some countries, barriers to free and unrestricted research. That is completely unacceptable. We will continue to do anything in our power, in our moral power as Yad Vashem, to make sure that historians are allowed to research the Holocaust without any impositions of safeguarding the national honor or painting a rosy picture of the way their compatriots behaved during the Holocaust. On top of that, of the two basic activities of documentation and research, we have to build, and in Yad Vashem I am determined to build in the coming years, a strategy of engagement. I think that Yad Vashem has incredible treasures. I spoke about the 200 million documents and the largest library we have in the world in Holocaust books, etc. My intention is, I believe that the time has come in order to put the Holocaust at the forefront of public opinion, of the political, diplomatic arena in the world, because we still have a lot to learn from the Holocaust. I will conclude by telling you this. You know that many dignitaries visit Yad Vashem, all the dignitaries, presidents, prime ministers, foreign affairs ministers, and ambassadors that come to Israel visit Yad Vashem. And I used to tell them the following. There are many lessons from the Holocaust. And to tell the truth, as long as those lessons are carved out from what occurred in the 30s and the 40s, are carved out by decent persons, they are legitimate. There are some individual lessons, there are national lessons, there are universal lessons, there are many, and lessons can differ. But I believe that I'm entitled also to my lessons from the Holocaust. And the lessons of the Holocaust that I always present to dignitaries that visit Yad Vashem, because they are genuine and sincere and true, and I want to conclude by presenting them also to you, are those two. The first one is that the Holocaust shows the vital existential importance of a independent Jewish state. We Jews, even if we weren't born there, we all figuratively traveled in the St. Louis boat, in the ship that wandered from dock to dock, from port to port, with Jewish refugees escaping the Holocaust. Tried to dock in North America, tried to dock in the Caribbean, tried to dock in South America, and were rejected by all governments until they had to go back to Europe to face massacre, extermination. The state of Israel, and yes, this is not a cliche. is an historical fact, my friends. The state of Israel is the guarantee that there will be no future St. Louis. And if there is a future St. Louis, it will find a safe haven. And the second conclusion, the second lesson I want to present is that anti-Semitism, we are not in Europe of the 1930s. No, we are far from being in the Europe of the 1930s. But there is one difference between us and the world in the 1930s. And the difference is that we are experienced. We know for sure from history to what monstrous dimensions anti-Semitism can grow. Therefore, the duty of a leader, of an intellectual, of a journalist is, I had a power cut here in my home. I hope you hear me. The lesson is that when you see anti-Semitism, confront it immediately, confront it aggressively, confront it decisively, confront it with determination, because otherwise it may grow to the dimensions it grew already once. If it happened once, it can happen twice. Anti-Semitism should be confronted forcibly, immediately, and that is the responsibility of all governments, of all men and women of influence. Thank you so much.